Um, Calvin Trillin is up next, and I'll just give him a little intro. Calvin Trillin is the author of 31 books, and he's the nation's deadline poet. He's been acclaimed in fields of writing that are remarkably diverse. As someone who has published solidly reported pieces in the New Yorker for 40 years, he has been called perhaps the finest reporter in America. His wry commentary on the American scene and his books chronicling his adventures as the Happy Eater have earned him renown as a classic American humorist. His About Alice, a 2007 New York Times bestseller, was hailed as a miniature masterpiece and was followed by two other best-selling memoirs, Remembering Denny and Messages from My Father. From 1978 to 1985, Trillin wrote a humor column for The Nation, and the column was syndicated in newspapers from 85 to 95. And we're delighted to have him here with us today for some topical poetry.
This is from The Nation, December 12, 1981, and it's called Eating with the Pilgrims. My campaign to change the national Thanksgiving dish from turkey to spaghetti carbonara is based on deep historical and philosophical considerations. Nobody has offered proof that the Pilgrims ate turkey at the first Thanksgiving dinner. The only thing we know for sure about what the Pilgrims ate is that it couldn't have tasted very good. They were from East Anglia, a part of England where even today, every young woman is brought up to boil the vegetables for a month and a half in case one of the dinner guests shows up without his teeth. Also, it's all very well to say that we should give thanks by eating the meal our forebears ate, but as it happens, one of the things I give thanks for every year is that those people were not my forebears. The Pilgrims were an offshoot of Puritanism, and H.L. Mencken defined Puritanism as the haunting fear that someone somewhere may be happy. Who wants forebears who put people in the stocks for playing the harpsichord on the Sabbath or having an innocent little game of pinch and giggle? In fact, ever since it became fashionable to dwell on the atrocities of American history, ever since, that is, we entered what the historians call the era of year-round Yom Kippur, I have been more and more grateful that none of my forebears got near this place before 1906. My forebears had nothing to do with the slavery or the slaughter of the American buffalo or rapacious 19th century capitalism. When people over here were chasing Indians, other people over there were chasing us. So we have a lot to be thankful for. This year, the whole family went over to Raffetto's pasta store on Houston Street to see the spaghetti cut. It's important, I think, to have these little holiday rituals. When we sat down at the table, I told the children the story of the first Thanksgiving. In England, a long time ago, there were people called Pilgrims who were very strict about making sure everyone observed the Sabbath and nobody cooked food with any flavor and that sort of thing. And they decided to go to America where they could enjoy freedom to nag. The other people in England said, glad to see the back of them. In America, the Pilgrims tried farming, but they couldn't get much done because they were always putting each other in stocks for crimes like suspicion of cheerfulness. The Indians took pity on the Pilgrims and helped them with their farming, even though the Indians thought the Pilgrims were about as much fun as teenage circumcision. The Pilgrims were grateful, so grateful that they invited the Indians over for a Thanksgiving meal, and the Indians, having had some experience with Pilgrim cuisine in the past, took the precaution of bringing along one dish of their own. They brought a dish that ancestors had learned many generations before from none other than Christopher Columbus, who was known to the Indians as the big Italian fella. The dish was spaghetti carbonara, made with pancetta bacon and fontina and the best imported prosciutto. The Pilgrims hated it. They said it was heretically tasty and the work of the devil and the sort of thing foreigners ate. The Indians were so disgusted that on the way back to their village after dinner, One of them made a remark about the Pilgrims that was repeated for generations and unfortunately caused confusion among historians about the first Thanksgiving meal. He said, "What a bunch of turkeys." George Washington and the cherry tree, updated. Young George could not deny he felled that tree. His moral code was certainly forbidden. In such a situation, Trump would say, "I cannot tell a lie. Obama did it." The transformation of William Barr. His past, they said, was proof that he would be a pretty straight AG, but going down a different road, he became Trump's most corrupted toady. The words that he forgot are these: lie down with dogs, get up with fleas. Trump's threats to the Iranians. He said we would target their cultural sites. The next day, he had much less surety. Still, thinking of what might be culture to him, they're beefing up golf course security. The GOP and voter suppression. Amidst all the campaigning babble, one strategy is always worth noting. To keep them from voting against us, we simply need keep them from voting. Wartime president. Trump calls himself a wartime president. This self-styled wartime president's disposed to mock all masks in states that keep bars closed. A list of acts like these we should compile in case someday we hold a war crimes trial. Why Trump doesn't wear a mask. This is inspired by a letter to the New York Times by Sarah Crichton that says, as any woman could tell you, the masks smear makeup. The president is afraid of makeup stains on his mask and unsightly smears on his photographed face. So could it be that what he's fearing is gobs of orange makeup smearing? Could that be why he takes the view that wearing masks is up to you? And why he mocks as sissies those who cover up the mouth and nose? So even some not in his base now emulate his unmasked face? A shame so many die so he can keep his visage blemish free. Donald J. Trump, MD. Because his uncle taught at MIT, he catches on to science, so says he. That means that from those genes of his from Queens, he knows his stuff on testing and vaccines. For otherwise, how would he know to teach the way to conquer COVID, mainline bleach? George W. Bush. The effect on his campaign of the release of George W. Bush's college transcript. Obliviously on he sails, with marks not quite as good as quails. A short history of Lloyd Benson's dealings with special interests. The man is known for quo pro quidness. In Texas, that's how folks do business. If you knew what Sununu knows about quantum physics and Greek, and oil explorations and most favored nations, and the secret handshake of Deke, maybe you too, like Sununu, would adopt as your principal rule that you are the brightest, you're lit the lightest, and everyone else is a fool. With the IQ that Sununu relentlessly tells us is his, you might think you're paid to devote half your day to displaying yourself as a whiz. But if it's true that Sununu's so smart you'd think that he'd know what always defines the truly fine minds, the smartest guys don't let it show. That was the first poem in the nation that I did for the nation. Richard Pearl, whose fault is he? Consider kids who bullied Richard Pearl, those kids who said Pearl threw just like a girl, those kids who poked poor Pearl to show how soft a mama's boy could be, those kids who oft times pushed poor Richard down and could be heard addressing him as sissy, wimp, or nerd. Those kids have got a lot to answer for, because Richard Pearl now wants to start a war. The message his demeanor gets across, he'll show those playground bullies who's the boss. He still looks soft, but when he writes or talks, there is no tougher dude among the hawks. And he's got planes and ships and tanks and guns, all manned, of course, by other people's sons. An out-of-towner questions a New Yorker about America's mayor. This was in 2008 when he was known as America's mayor. So tell me the most charming feature then of he who saved the city from collapse. It might take me a while to think of that. Offhand, I'd say vindictiveness, perhaps. That's Rudy. Mike Pence as chief of the coronavirus task force. The president believed that it made sense to put Mike Pence in charge of our defense against this quickly spreading worldwide threat to public health, perhaps the worst threat yet. Could it be wise, some asked, to place reliance on someone with a strong disdain for science? At least Mike Pence supporters say he's trying to modify his boss's blatant lying. This poem's called 3 Cheers. We give 3 cheers to Dr. Fauci. Quite old, but hardly on the couch. He confirmed that Fauci's still no slouch. He just gave the facts that made Trump grouchy. So 3 cheers more for Dr. Fauci. Here's William Barr's handling of the Mueller report. He had the resume and name for which such DC lawyers strive. The headline of his life has changed. It's William Barr, he took a dive. This is what's called White House Stonewall. Subpoenas harass us, we throw them away. More witch hunts, we cannot abide it. We've said all along, we've got nothing to hide, and that's why we're trying to hide it. 545 of the children separated from their parents at the border. The parents of these kids have not been found. De facto orphans now, their lives are blighted. A question that we really need to ask, why haven't those who did this been indicted? Trump's response to losing the vote. Tradition in America relates that losing presidential candidates speak graciously in phrases meant to heal and serve to benefit our common weal. And what of Trump's will scholars be enshrining? Just lies, more lies, accompanied by whining.